Welcome back to the Crash Course podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. We did not have the Indy 500 this weekend like we're accustomed to on Memorial Day weekend, but this podcast is gonna be pretty much everything about IndyCar. There's been some changes to the schedule. There has already been a race in Indianapolis this year. And we're going to do a little bit of a IndyCar draft, if you will, going through kind of the champions through the last 20 years, kind of something a little similar to what we did with the best games from 1990. We're doing a champions draft over the last 20 races from 2000 to 2019. So it's going to be basically all things IndyCar. B. Scott, it was weird not having the race this weekend.
Yeah, it really was. It just didn't really feel like Memorial Weekend to me. And really this whole month just hasn't really felt like the month of May, just because majority of the time I would be out at the track and wasn't able to be out there. So it just felt really weird.
Yeah, it definitely was surreal. I didn't even last weekend, someone reminded me that this weekend was Memorial Day weekend. I had completely forgotten about it because there's not going to be a race. And obviously, for good reason, for safety reasons and all that. And I hope obviously also as well, everybody had a safe Memorial Day. And thank you to all the servicemen and women out there that are keeping our country safe. But yeah, we've got a lot of IndyCar stuff to talk about today. Let's start off with some IndyCar news here. So they did update the schedule. There was a schedule released earlier this year. I think it was back in April or early May, where they outlined what the schedule will look like when racing resumes in June. But they have made some changes. The season opener is still going to be June 6th at Texas, which will have the IMS road course follow that. Road America has been moved from June 21st to July 11th and 12th. It's now a doubleheader. This is probably the biggest news and probably the saddest news of the whole thing, is that Richmond and Toronto will not be ran this year due to local restrictions, which obviously makes sense, but it's still sad. I know I love races at Richmond and stuff like that when the IndyCar used to drive there, especially back in the day. So that kind of stinks that they won't be there. And then St. Pete will be the season finale on October 25th. That was kind of the date that wasn't set in stone. They knew St. Pete was going to be on the schedule. They just weren't sure when it was going to be ran. So that's going to be the season finale. And it'll be interesting to see what they do to accommodate the people that had tickets for the season opener that was supposed to be at St. Pete, because I know that was a big topic that we talked about, how they weren't going to do refunds. So it'll be interesting to see if they just basically say, hey, if you had tickets to that race, you're going to just be able to get in and redeem your tickets there. So interesting things from the schedule. Obviously, some things changing, some things not. The Road America doubleheader is going to be cool. Like I said, I think the biggest news from that is that Richmond's not going to be ran, and neither will Toronto. I'm not so much sad about Toronto because there's plenty of road courses on the schedule, and so that one doesn't really stand out too much to me. That's not one I'm going to necessarily miss, but I don't know. I like the short track races. I like the races in Iowa. I was excited to see the race at Richmond. I know IndyCar used to race at Dover as well. I wish they would race at more tracks like that.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to get back to that more so. I know they're looking at getting back to New Hampshire and everything like that as well, or Loudon or whatever it is now.
Yeah.
But
I'd like to see Martinsville, to be honest. I think Martinsville would be cool.
That would be cool too. The one thing you left off of the schedule announcement, which I think is one of the biggest things, is the fact that they're going to be racing again at Indy in October. So Indianapolis is going to technically have 3 races this year, 2 on the road course, obviously the first being July 4th, the same day that the NASCAR Xfinity Series races at IMS, followed up by the Brickyard 400 on July 5th. So that's going to be awesome. That's something that a lot of people have talked about, and bringing in more fans for the Brickyard is a combined doubleheader, whatever you may call it, with IndyCar and NASCAR. And we're getting it now just because of scheduling limitations and needing to get races in, and because of how everything's been turned upside down. So I think that's going to be awesome, because you're going to get to see a lot of guys have the potential then of trying to cross over for IndyCar and NASCAR. So you're going to get to see some exciting things there potentially. And then obviously you have the Indy 500 on August 23rd. August is pretty much remaining open for Indy, which is going to be awesome. So they're still going to have a full weekend of qualifying. They're still planning on potentially trying to do some sort of carb day, which includes the Freedom 100, which in my opinion, that is the best part of carb day, is the Freedom 100, and then followed by the race on that Sunday. And I mean, it's going to be a different type of Indy 500 this year, mostly because of the weather conditions in August are very different compared to Memorial Weekend. So think about the race from 2 years ago when they had the hottest temperature recorded for an Indy 500, the one that Will Power won, and back in 2018. And that is going to be very similar to the type of weather conditions that you see in August. So it's going to be really making the track very slick. And I think these teams are going to have more time to prepare for that because they're not coming into it thinking this is what May is going to be like. But a lot of teams know what August is like in Indiana because they're stationed out of Indiana. So it's going to make for a very interesting race, a lot of slipping and sliding around, which really, in my opinion, bodes well for a lot of IndyCar drivers because of their backgrounds coming up through USAC or dirt track racing, different things like that. So it's going to make for a really good race, in my opinion. It's going to be really hot in the stands. Craig, I don't know if you're going to be posted up in your typical turn 3 seats, but I'll be over there in turn 3 this year. So it's going to be a hot one out there. I'm ready for it regardless, though. So I'm just hoping they're going to be allowing fans into the stands. But then the third race is going to be, I believe, I can't remember the exact date, but it's like one of the first weekends of October.
It's like October 3rd. Yeah, I think we covered it a little bit when we did the whole entire schedule, like when that was first released. But yeah, that was originally supposed to be the season finale before they set the date for St. Pete. I'm kind of glad that it's not the season finale. I'm glad they still were able to get St. Pete in, although they're finishing super late in October.
I don't mind that one bit. I always thought IndyCar ended way too soon. They could have had a few more races put on their schedule and to contend with NASCAR, in my opinion. But that October 3rd race is going to be fun just because, you know, they're going to be running it on the road course. I don't know if they're running a different formation of the road course or whatever's going to be set up for the endurance cars going that weekend as well. So that's going to be a really exciting weekend all around. So I think the fact that they're able to get into IMS 3 times and really give fans multiple chances to see them this year, and not just in 1 month, but over a period of 3 months, that's going to be a really big thing for the fans here in Indy and just fans nationwide, just to be able to come into IMS 3 times throughout the year to see Indy cars run.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job of, you know, gassing up, you know, the other series too. So they're getting a chance to, you know, gas up the Brickyard by having IndyCar there that same weekend, gas up the endurance races by having, you know, the IndyCar there as well. And I'm interested to see if maybe it's because of like how, because I'm interested to see how the fan restrictions are going to be, because you have people. I'm interested to see the amount of people that like buy their tickets like right away, because that's how, you know, my situation is, you know, my parents have the tickets or have to reorder the tickets like within a month after the race, and I'm interested to see how many people of like that exist, or who have already bought tickets, because even if you don't buy it immediately, you know, after last year's race, like how is that going to work? You know, if a lot of the tickets have already sold, let's say 80% of the race's tickets were already sold, but you're only going to let, you know, the track be at 50% capacity. Are you going to say, well, cool, if you had tickets, we're not going to sell, you know, you have an option of either using it for one of the other 2 races on the road course, which would be interesting to see if that's kind of the route they go.
Right. I think if you're going to limit anything, it's going to be the infield. You're going to close off turn 3 or the snake pit area, all of that.
They're not watching the race anyway, so it's fine.
So they don't even know they came to a concert and a race broke out. So
like, man, these cars are going real fast. We're gonna probably have to ticket some of them.
Turn those cars down. They're getting in my way of listening to Skrillex. And I think a lot of IndyCar drivers would be okay with that as well, because there has been a lot of complaints about the pyrotechnics from the snake pit performances with the flames and the smoke that it causes lingering across the track between 3 and 4. And getting in the vision of the drivers. And obviously 3 and 4 are a little bit of a trickier area to begin with. So I think some drivers would be okay with that if they're not having a big ball of fire in their peripheral vision.
Right.
I think that's going to be one thing that they'll be okay with. But this schedule is really probably going to cater more towards the race fan and not just the casual Memorial Day party fan. That
True, but it would just be interesting to see because, like I said, even if the tickets were only 85, 70, 75, because I can't imagine it's less than 70% already sold out. That's probably on the low end. But if you're only going to let 50% capacity, of course, by the time you get
when I purchased my tickets in February, they were running low on different areas.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Like if you had tickets, what they're going to do to accommodate that, or if they're going to be, if you're smart, you also say, hey, you know what? If you can't make it to the Indy 500, there's usually plenty of seats for the Brickyard that they need to get filled.
Like
so
anything, they're going to be looking at more fan distancing and fan restrictions for the Brickyard than they would potentially be for looking at for the Indy 500.
Yeah, true. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see what they do. I'm hoping and praying that I'm able to go in October. That's a tricky time of year, work wise, but I'm hoping that it'll work out and get a chance to go.
I'm hoping I can go to the endurance race. When those cars came here, it was about 10 years ago. They did a road course race the same weekend as the Brickyard.
Right.
That was probably one. They called it Speed Weekend or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it didn't live on very long, but man, I love that type of racing. So to be able to see that at IMS again, and I know Roger Penske's going to work on trying to bring a 24-hour race to Indy. That would be pretty awesome.
That would be pretty awesome. Well, there has been one race already at the Indy 500, at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, albeit virtually. This year was part of the iRacing Challenge for IndyCar. They had the First Responder 175 that was back on May 2nd. It was the final leg of IndyCar's iRacing Challenge. It was won by Scott McLaughlin. It was 70 laps, 19 lead changes among 12 drivers. McLaughlin only led 2 laps. He passed Oliver Askew on the final lap, and that is because Oliver Askew was crashed intentionally by Santino Ferrucci as Askew was starting to get a little bit of a run. It was something along those lines. Askew was getting a little bit of a run or vice versa, and Ferrucci just basically took a hard left and took him out, which drew a little bit of ire from some of IndyCar Twitter, which honestly, obviously this is a race that you like to see have on the iRacing schedule. It was pretty cool as kind of a palate cleanser for the month of May and everything, and you still had some IndyCar racing in the month, but I thought it was kind of funny that people were so outraged about maintaining the purity of iRacing when I was like, that's actually an interesting way to approach it. I don't know if this is the bad way to look at iRacing and how it's done, but you know what? If you're trying, this is the one time if you want to be super aggressive, this is the time to actually do it instead of when you actually are in the cars going 200 miles an hour.
Just don't be super aggressive on the radio because it may lose you a sponsor.
Yeah, that's we've talked about that already at length, but definitely don't want to. You might be replaced fairly soon, depending on what you say on the radio. But before we get into the IndyCar draft, B. Scott, let's get a quick word from Anchor. All right, B. Scott, let's get into this Indy 500 draft. We're going to draft a 4-car team from Indy 500 champions from the last 20 years. This will be the following drivers: Juan Pablo Montoya, who won back in 2000. That was the first race I attended back for Target Chip Ganassi. He won in 2015 for Penske. So that's kind of cool that he won for like the 2 major players kind of that era. Elio Castroneves, who won in 01 and 02, as well as 2009. Jill DeFerrin, who won in 2003. Buddy Rice won in 2004, a rain-shortened race, which, we talked a lot about the legitimacy of titles, of like shortened seasons. But, you look at something like that, like obviously, Buddy Rice was the leader whenever the checker flag flew, even though it was a little bit shorter than normal. And that Borg Warner still is sweet nonetheless.
Yeah, in racing rules, no matter what, as long as you get halfway through the race, if rain comes, yeah. And I think this was one that was even run like on a Tuesday, if I remember right. No,
this is the one where they literally during the rain delay.
They basically stopped it, not just because of rain, but they needed to get the fans out of the stands because there was a tornado coming through Speedway, Indiana at the time.
Funny story about this. So this is why I remember this so vividly. So yeah, they wanted to get, like you said, the fans out of the stands as quickly as possible because of the tornado warning that was in effect, the sirens that were going off. My mom accidentally left her wallet up in the stands. So me, my sister, and my dad, and I think my sister and I both had we brought a friend because we have 6 tickets. And we were all standing at the bottom of the stands. My mom's with one of the event staff, looking through the stands. We're like, we have to go. It's a tornado. We're going to die. What are you doing? And she's up there oh, I think I might have left it over here. We're like, we need to go. So it's the one that is burned in my brain for sure.
Dramatic experience for little Craig.
What's up?
Dramatic
Uh-oh.
experience for little Craig.
Yes, it was a traumatic experience. Let's see, 2004, I would have been 13. So, yeah, it was fun times. You have Dan Weldon from 2005, and then 2011, that was the race where J.R. Hildebrand crashes on the final lap. Sam Hornish, who wins in 2006. Dario Franchitti, who won in 2007, 2010, and 2012. I forgot he was a 3-time champion. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast when we gone back through the champions. But
you do remember 2 of his because of running for Ganassi, but you don't realize that in 2007 he won for it was Anthony Green at the time.
Right. That good old Canadian club car. Scott Dixon.
With his wife dancing in the rain. That was another rain shortened race, by the way.
Correct. That was the one where Marco flipped on the backstretch, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. And then you had Scott Dixon in 2008, Tony Kanaan, my guy, 2013, Ryan Hunter-Reay, 2014, Alexander Rossi won the 100th back in 2016, Takuma Sato in 2017, Will Power in 2018, and Simon Pagenaud won last year's race. So, B. Scott, I'll let you go first.
I'll tell you, when I look at this list, the one thing that stands out to me as most surprising is Scott Dixon only having 1.
Right. That's kind of the thing too, because when you're making this draft, you're not. You're just taking these drivers in their prime. It doesn't matter if you could have a guy on here like Dario who's won 3. You may take Scott Dixon over him because he's been so consistent. He just only has the 1 win.
But he hasn't been very consistent as of late. He usually if you think about it, you see him being dominant because he's so good in practice, and then at qualifying is where he really does well. Kind of similar to an Ed Carpenter. Ed Carpenter does very well in practice, very well in qualifying. Come race day, he's there. But really, if you think about Scott Dixon, he's never really truly up there. Even recently, he's just been kind of meh.
Yeah.
So I guess that's when you really sit back and you think about it, it's not that surprising. But when you think of Scott Dixon and how dominant he's been throughout his entire career to only have 1 Indy 500 victory. But this is something we've talked about in the past with Scott Dixon. He doesn't look at it as all or nothing for one race. Scott Dixon's looking at a big picture of the entire season for championships. He's got a ton of championships. So that's a big reason for Scott Dixon there. But when I'm putting my team together, I'm kind of going differently here. So for sure, I'm going Elio Castroneves just because he is a 3-time winner and that he is just been on the doorstep knocking for number 4. How many times has he finished runner-up in the past several years?
Right.
So he's just a guy that you can always count on to be up there running in the top handful of cars contending for a victory. So you definitely have to have him in there. My second car I'm doing this, I'm just going in order of the list from years and everything here. So this is in no particular order. Like with my first pick, my next one, I would take Dan Weldon. If there was anybody that knew his way around that track, like the back of his hand, it was Dan Weldon. And mostly also because he was just such a nice guy and everybody loved him. You have to have Dan Weldon on your team. If you have a team of just a starting two of Elio Castroneves and Dan Weldon, you're doing pretty well there. The third car I'm taking Alexander Rossi. Very similar to like a Dan Weldon and Elio Castroneves. Alexander Rossi is going to have more victories, definitely. I mean, ever since he won the 100th, he's consistently up in the top 3, it seems like, running order, and just battling for a victory. And when you go into the month of May now, you look at Alexander Rossi and go, yeah, he's going to be a guy that's going to be there at the end contending for the win. So those are 3 I'm definitely taking. Man, the fourth one's a little tough. I mean, Juan Pablo is either he's either up there running at the front or he's struggling. I think I'm going to go Dario Franchitti, mostly because Dario, very much like Scott Dixon, always ran very well at Indy. Practice, qualifying, but then he also translated that over to race day as well. He was a very dominant car. And also he won the Indy 500 the year that I was able to cover the Indy 500 for an internship. So a little sentimentality there as well. So those are the 4 cars I'm going with. I'm going with Elio Castroneves, Dan Weldon, Dario Franchitti, and Alexander Rossi. I think that lineup would win you the Indy 500 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I think so. I'm right there with you. I think Elio is a no-brainer. If you're going number 1 overall pick, Elio's a guy that, has, is just, he knows Indy. He's successful. My first 2 would be, exactly the same as yours, B. Scott. You've got Elio, who is just, dominant, at that track. He's got 3, but he was very close to having 4, possibly 5, maybe even more than that. He's just been very successful at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Then you have Dan Weldon, who his second one's kind of flukish, but he still is a guy who consistently runs really well at the Indianapolis 500.
Don't call that one flukish. I mean, yeah, he was most likely not going to win until J.R. Hildebrand hit the wall, but that was Dan Weldon's swan song, so that's not flukish. We're never gonna call that one flukish because it happened the way it was supposed to happen. History unfolded the way history was supposed to unfold.
Well, I'm not taking it away from him. I'm just saying that, I mean, J.R. Hildebrand literally went through that corner great the first 199 times. And, I mean, does Will Power win in 2018 if, somebody doesn't run out of gas? I mean, sometimes it's just like that. I mean, is Dario going to win, in 2007 if their race isn't shortened by rain? Like, I'm not taking it away from Dario, not taking it away from Dan. I'm just saying that's one of the more peculiar. Like, you see guys lose races on fuel mileage all the time. You see guys win races because it's rain shortened all the time. You very rarely see a driver crash on his own on the final lap, final corner of the race. Like, it's not like he got caught up in somebody else's wreck or, he cut a tire and something happened. Like, he literally was trying to get around lap traffic, and he had a pretty big lead too, because he kind of coasted, was still in the lead for a little bit down the front stretch before Dan Weldon passed him. So instead of backing off and losing the momentum, which who's to say if that would have really impacted it, if he would have let off the throttle, would that have done anything? Would it not have? I don't remember it super vividly, but like, yeah, obviously knowing, the rest of the year unfolding the way that it did, obviously, glad to see Dan Weldon get one more. But to me, that doesn't make it, I mean,
I think what we can agree upon is that regardless of who would have ended up winning that year, had J.R. Hildebrand not hit the wall, those two cars were two of the coolest cars, paint scheme wise, in the
True.
field. Yeah, J. Hildebrandt had that camo National Guard paint scheme. That was really cool. And then, man, the Dan Weldon, William Ross, bright orange and black and white. I mean, that was probably one of the coolest cars in the field that year.
Yeah, and you can tell. I mean, obviously everybody's, who wins Indy's excited, but you can tell how much it meant to Dan when you like hear the radio of like him making that, like, yeah.
He loved Indy.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, easy pick for number 2. I am going to put Dixon in my lineup just because, I mean, again, the races he has, or the race he did win at Indy, he was super dominant, and he's usually, he's there, he's consistent. He's not, always super at the front of the field all the time, but he is consistent. And then I think for me, the last pick, I'm going to go Will Power. It's another driver that, now that he's figured out how to run ovals, now that he's gotten better, I think that he's a good addition to add. He's kind of hitting his stride oval-wise. And,
Alexander Rossi?
I want to change it up a little bit. I can't go the exact same guys as you.
I know.
That's boring.
That's interesting. To take two guys that, haven't always been up there at the front.
Right, but
I respect it.
He's been better lately, though. He's better, he's better as of late. He's won more recently, only by 2 years, but still. But yeah, I mean, I think, mixing it up a little bit. I think in terms of like, if you're going with like a one-time winner, it's tough because, you go based on, I mean, I know I picked 2 one-time winners, but like, it's a little tougher because, they've only won 1, but they've also had some races that have been great. They've had some races that have been not so great. Alexander Rossi has been really good, but also, like, we didn't know who the heck he was 4 years ago, and I'm not saying that's a knock on him. It's just –
well, we didn't know who he was. I mean, obviously he was a rookie, so that's kind of hard. Like,
right. No, I'm not, like, knocking him. I'm just saying that, Will Power, I have a bigger sample size. Right. And – instead of Rossi, who, he's had some great runs. He's had some okay runs. He's won before. I don't know if that really matters, so I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean.
He's always been up there near the front ever since he won as a rookie.
Right. So, but yeah, we got to mix it up. But I think, like I said, I mean, all those guys, are good picks. I mean, obviously, Weldon and Elio are the 2 no-brainers, and then like the pick of Rossi, like the pick of Dario, but mix it up a little bit, put Dixon in there.
Let me ask you this, since we've gotten your picks here. This is kind of off topic, but as we look ahead towards August with a fresh slate, not having seen any of these cars run yet this year,
right?
I'm not gonna ask you who do you think is gonna win the Indy 500, but what I'm gonna ask is, who do you think has the best chance to win their first Indy 500?
Ooh, that.
Because, obviously, you can, if you say, who do you think's going to win the 500, you can say, I could think it's going to be Alexander Rossi. I think it's going to be Elio Castroneves, or whatever. But I want to know, who do you think who has the opportunity to win their first Indy 500?
Oh, that's really tough. You've got, I don't know why the guy who's won why can't I think of the guy who's won the last, 2 championships, I feel like? Not Pagano. He drives for Penske. Why can't Joseph Newgarden? I think that would be a solid pick. I think that's –
I tend to agree with that, yeah.
Like, if you're going to pick anybody out of the list – but that's tough because, a lot of the front runners right now, like your Alexander Rossi's, like your Simon Pagano now, and like your Dixons and all that stuff, they've won before. And then you kind of go out to some of the guys who are in the field but haven't won before. Even, your Ryan Hunter-Reyes who are up there in the standings, usually they've got to win. So you kind of try to pick those guys out. I'm struggling to think of a lot of other people that I would feel super confident in picking. You've got Graham Rahal out there and guys like that. But I wouldn't feel confident picking like a Graham Rahal over a Joseph.
Or Marco. I wouldn't even feel confident picking a Marco.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Marco a little bit more here in a second. But man, I don't mean his career's. Well, go ahead, B. Scott.
for me, I look at two drivers potentially. Obviously, Joseph Newgarden. He's shown, whether it's been with Ed Carpenter or with Penske, that he knows how to get around that track and how to find the speed and run within traffic or run up front. I mean, I think last year was a really good chance for him to have won it. But the other driver I have in mind, now that we're seeing kind of what he has a potential with when he gets good equipment underneath him, is Connor Daly. I mean, that's a name that a lot of people aren't really talking about. He was a driver that, I mean, he was up there battling for that victory with Andretti power last year. And this is a driver that respects the track. He understands the track. He just needed an opportunity to get some good equipment underneath him. And now he's going to be with ECR at Carpenter. And they always have good cars for the Indy 500. So I think those two drivers have the best chance to win their first Indy 500. And if, I mean, man, either one I would be happy to see pull out their first victory. I think I would be more excited for Connor Daly just because
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Running for a hometown team. And I mean, or actually, even Ed Carpenter. I mean, he's a guy that hasn't won it.
Right.
He's come close. So those are three drivers that I think have the best shot, with Joseph Newgarden and Connor Daly having the best of those three.
Yeah, I think those are all good picks. But I'm right there with you. I think Joseph Newgarden, though, overwhelmingly is kind of the favorite of those guys. But yeah, any of those guys I would love to see, in victory lane come August. It's going to be really interesting to see what they're able to do. Before we wrap things up here on the podcast side of things, because remember, we do also, if you go over to the YouTube channel, go ahead and plug everything right now. You can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter. You can follow, or you can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Our website is anchor.fm/Crash Course, but you can hear us every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be heard, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere. And then we do have a YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. So make sure you check that out. We're going to watch the end of the 2018 Indy 500 because I couldn't find 2019. So we're going to watch 2018 and kind of experiment with that a little bit. So if you want to see some extra content, that's going to be on the YouTube channel. But we'll wrap this up here with our favorite Indy 500 memory from attending a race. I wanted to kind of keep it, there's a lot of memories that you can have, from watching the race on TV when, before you ever went to a race or something like that. But, what race you were alive and like able to see. And, obviously there's a lot to jump off. I mean, personal favorite for me is 2013 when Tony Kanaan won, because I'm a big Tony Kanaan fan. It was funny. I was too young to really know the magnitude of the 2001 win with Elio and Paul Tracy, that whole fiasco. And then you have, a lot of, obviously the 100th was awesome. Dan Weldon's final win was awesome. There's a lot of great moments. But when I was thinking about a moment that, like, when I, think of like memories, like walking home from, the track, well, not walking home, walking to the car from the track.
Muncie.
I walk back to, it's part of the experience, man. It's a great, 24-hour walk back to, probably longer. I don't even know how long it would take to walk what would normally be an hour drive time. But anyway, you look back at all the memories from the Indy 500. For me, one that sticks out, I said we'd talk about Marco again here in a second, and then we'll get to it now. And that's when Sam Hornish edged Marco. I think of the passes on the last lap, like coming to the line. Sam Hornish won because it's a funny kind of scenario. I wanted Marco to win in the moment. I'm glad Hornish won because it's weird. I look at Team Penske kind of the way that I look at the Houston Texans, in the sense that, like, obviously I don't want the Houston Texans to win. I'd rather the Colts win. But there's a lot of guys on the Texans that I like Deshaun Watson, like J.J. Watt. And so it's the same way with kind of Team Penske. Like, I love Elio. I love, a lot of their drivers. Sam Hornish was fine, but for whatever reason, I just don't ever want – I'd rather see another team than Penske win. And it's just because they've won so much of the Indy 500. So, so it was funny when Hornish – because Hornish was great when he was in the Pennzoil Panther car, before he made the jump over the Penske. So it was kind of like seeing like Ichiro on the Yankees. It kind of just felt weird because here's this guy who was on this little team and was killing it. And then he goes to, the evil empire and Team Penske. Finally gets that win. I wanted Marco to win. And it's kind of weird to look back on that race and be like, man, that was kind of the prime of Marco's career, because it's not really amounted to too much after that. He's done well a few times, but he only has like a handful of wins. He's not really panned out the way that a lot of people may have thought he was going to pan out. And so you look at kind of, a microcosm of Marco Andretti's career, and that's kind of it. Like that, a situation where, he was really close to striking big, but just couldn't get it done in the end. So when I think of memories of the Indy 500, that's one that really stands out to me, is the 2006 win where Hornish edges Marco at the line.
For me, I'm going to go with, two. There's two that stand out to me. 2010, that was the one that I got to cover as an intern for Fox 59 Sports. That one was really the one that really helped me fall more in love with IndyCar, like fully appreciate it. Just being around it all day, every day, getting to know people around the track, getting to know teams, drivers, different things. I will always remember during qualifying being in the media row for interviews after drivers qualified, and Dan Weldon being one of the most friendliest guys you could ever talk to, making you feel like, your old friends. So those types of memories will always stand out. The other thing, the one that stands out to me is 2014. A friend of the Crash Course, Nathan Wilson, and we attended the race, and we sat on the front row of the front straightaway on the start-finish line.
Nice.
And we were hoping to see Elio win his fourth and climb the fence right there. That was one of the first years that he was running the Rick Mears paint scheme of the bright yellow and Pennzoil to honor him. So that was, we were hoping for that, and it came down to a photo finish between Castroneves and Ryan Hunter-Reay. But what made that day really cool was there was a brother, sister, and some friends sitting behind us that flew in from Brazil that day to see Elio win his fourth. So they wanted to they wanted to experience the same thing that we were hoping to experience as well. Unfortunately, came up super, super close. Just was, still runner up, but still to see Ryan Hunter-Reay get that win in one of those memorable finishes, that was pretty cool. And just to get to know the people sitting right behind us and their story. And to this day, I still keep in contact with them all the way down in Brazil. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. You don't really like, that's one of the moments that kind of makes you realize like how big, you already know how big the Indy 500 is, but, big from Indiana, but it's, there's people that come in from all over, and it's pretty crazy to see that and pretty crazy to think, about that. So that's a pretty cool experience for sure. That will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course podcast. Remember, you can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter, like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast, and you can hear us every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be heard. So until next time, have a good week, everybody.